Good afternoon, everyone. We welcome you to this Elder Justice Initiative webinar on prosecution resources. As with all technology, we may experience a momentary lapse in the webinar session at some point. If in the event of that problem, please be patient, remain on the line with us, and the webinar should resume shortly. If you have an individual technical problem, please type a private chat message to the technical specialist Danielle McLean in the feedback box. Or if you cannot access the chat or the web portion, please send Danielle an email at dmclean@ovcttac.org. That's dmclean@ovcttac.org. So if you're joining us with the audio, that number is 1-866-398-2885. You should see that on your screen. And if you have any other technical difficulties during the webinar, please feel free to reach out to Danielle. Today's session will be recorded and made available on the training website following today's webinar. And if you have questions throughout the webinar, we encourage you to use the chat feature, and we will address as many questions as possible towards the end of the webinar. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Andy Mao.
Good morning or afternoon, depending upon where you're calling in from. My name is Andy Mao. I'm the coordinator of the Department of Justice's Elder Justice Initiative, which I'll be talking a little bit more about later. I have the good fortune of being joined today by Paige Ulrey. She is the Senior Deputy Prosecuting Attorney for King County Prosecutor's Office in Washington State and has been one of the office's dedicated elder abuse prosecutors for 14 years. We are also joined by Paul Greenwood, who has been a prosecutor with the San Diego DA's office for the past 24 years. And for over 21 years, he has headed up their elder abuse prosecution unit and has prosecuted all kinds of elder abuse crimes from homicides to theft. Both Paul and Paige are nationally recognized leaders in the field, and we're extremely fortunate to have them with us today. In terms of what we're going to try to accomplish today, we'll be talking briefly about the Elder Justice Initiative. Then we're going to be highlighting resources on the Elder Justice website that are designed especially for prosecutors. So if you are at your screen and you are able to, you could always log on to the website now, so you'll have it. That's at www.ElderJustice.gov at the appropriate time. So then we'll highlight some of the other resources that are also available on the Elder Justice website, and then we will take questions at the end. Given the amount of materials that we want to cover during the webinar today, we're going to really try to keep the questions until the end, but if there is something really urgent, feel free to chat, and then we'll try to accommodate as we go ahead. Before we begin the substantive part of our webinar, we thought it would be interesting and useful to get a sense of the experience level of the participants. And so with the help of Danielle and Lori, I think they're going to put up a poll question so that we can get a quick sense of the participants. So if you are able to, please click the box that applies to you, and the results will just come in, and we'll just take a look at that as we go. While people are noting their experience level, I want to talk a little bit about the Elder Justice Initiative. The initiative helps to support and coordinate the Department of Justice's elder justice activities. With regard to our own prosecutorial or law enforcement efforts, we do a wide array of criminal and civil work. On the civil side, we do a number of failure of care cases, which tend to focus on long-term care providers like nursing homes that are providing grossly substandard care. But in addition to our law enforcement efforts, which also includes financial fraud and crimes, the department's Elder Justice Initiative also helps to support the department's wide-ranging programmatic efforts that ranges from supporting elder abuse research that is done or supported through the National Institute of Justice. It supports the development of resources and training as is done by the Office of Violence Against Women or the Office of Victims of Crime, one of our supporters of this webinar series. So it covers a wide array of activities. One of the things that is one of our primary objectives and goals is to support the efforts of state and local prosecutors and law enforcement. Without a doubt, state and local prosecutors and law enforcement are the front line in terms of prosecutorial efforts against elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. And so the initiative, one of our objectives, is to help support those efforts. I think it's worth noting that this is a priority that has been recognized in the federal government. The Elder Justice Coordinating Council, which some of you may or may not be familiar with, is a cabinet-level committee comprised of leaders of the various federal agencies, and supporting elder abuse prosecutors was one of the priorities identified by that body. Likewise, last year, there were 2 White House meetings that focused on a wide array of issues affecting older adults, and elder abuse prosecutions and the importance that they play was also highlighted at both of those. Interestingly, one of the things that we hear often at both those meetings and when talking with state and local prosecutors is the frustration at the lack of training. And so that has been an area of focus for the department. We really have tried to think through how we can best support prosecutors. There are actually several really great live trainings. And with that, I thought I would shift over to Paige to talk a little bit about the, at least the DOJ-affiliated live trainings for elder abuse prosecutors. Paige, are you there?
I'm here, Andy. Hi, everyone. So what I wanted to talk to everyone about was the NIPEA training, which is the National Institute for the Prosecution of Elder Abuse. And that is a live national training that trains up to 54 prosecutors at a time. And it's put on by the Office on Violence Against Women, which is part of DOJ, in conjunction with the National Clearinghouse on Abuse in Later Life and Equitas. And right now, we only have the resources to put this on once to twice a year. And we hold it in a different location each time. The training is about 3.5 days long. And after a lot of thought about what we really need in one of these trainings, we decided to focus the training on the prosecution of one case of elder financial exploitation and one case of elder neglect, because those were the 2 forms of elder abuse that we found prosecutors to be the least familiar with. And the trainers are very experienced elder abuse prosecutors, along with an advocate, an APS worker, a geriatrician, a geriatric psychiatrist, and a forensic accountant. So we really bring together the expertise that is needed in order to learn how to effectively prosecute these cases. It's a very hands-on training. Prosecutors, by the end, we hope, are given the tools to handle these cases much more knowledgeably and effectively. And I really can't say enough what an outstanding training I think it is. On the slide that Andy's put up is a contact email address of Ann Latch at NCAL, and she is the person to contact if anyone's interested in getting more information on this training. And Andy, do you want me to go ahead and talk about OVW, the Enhanced Training and Services program?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you, Paige.
Sure. The second sort of section on the slide sets out some information on OVW's Enhanced Training and Services to End Abuse in Later Life program. And this is a grant program funded by OVW that basically gives money to a community to work on improving its response to elder abuse over a 3-year period. And it does that by instituting trainings of law enforcement, judges, direct service providers on how to recognize and respond to elder abuse. And then it also funds that community to send prosecutors to the NIPEA course that I just mentioned. It also addresses improving a community's coordinated response to elder abuse, improving services available to elder abuse victims in that community. And really, what I found is it tends to catalyze every discipline who's involved with elder abuse in a community to come together and to coordinate and respond better to these cases. So I've seen community after community be absolutely transformed by these grants as far as how knowledgeable law enforcement is in in identifying and investigating these cases, prosecutors' willingness to prosecute these cases, judges' understanding of the cases, and adult protective services and advocates' understanding of the cases. So it's absolutely a wonderful program. And I just, again, like NIPEA, I just think it's a huge asset to professionals who are in this field. This slide at the bottom talks about who to contact if you want more information. There's two different websites there. The NCAL website just gives general information on the program, and then the request for the proposal for the grant application, that web address is listed there as well. And I think the solicitation just came out quite recently, so it's still possible for people to apply for next year's funding. Anything else I should add there, Andy?
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
As Paige has highlighted, these trainings are phenomenal, and there's no doubt that they have benefited richly those communities or prosecutors that have been able to participate in them. But the problem is that the demand for good training for elder abuse prosecutors unfortunately outstrips the ability to do all these live trainings. And so that was the genesis for a discussion among many of us to try to figure out how we could make elements of those trainings more available more widely to state and local prosecutors. And so the question is, given the fact that it seems to be that online training, video training of the sort was becoming more and more popular, was there a way to take some of those elements and make those available in this form? So with that, I think we are going to transition over to the live demonstration of the ElderJustice website. And again, we launched this website about a little bit more than a year ago. And it is a, if you can see it now, this is the landing page of the ElderJustice website, which you can reach at www.ElderJustice.gov. And if you go on this website, if you go along the left nav, you'll see there's a section for prosecutors. At the end of this website, after we've done the prosecutors' materials, I will try to highlight some of the other materials as well. But for starters, I wanted to highlight the prosecutors section. And again, let me just preface my remarks by saying that this is very much a work in progress. This is our effort to support state and local prosecutors, and so to the extent that there are other materials, other types of training, other types of resources that state and local prosecutors think that would be beneficial to them, you should communicate those with us. We really want this to be a living resource for state and local prosecutors and want it to be something that you actually use. We're going to start our tour of this section by focusing on some of the training resources. So you'll see on this section, prosecutor training resources. If you click on that, this takes you to this video series, which is a video series on the prosecution of elder abuse. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Paige and to talk a little bit about the development of this particular series and how we pick these topics, and we can talk a little bit about each of the different sections then. So Paige, can I hand it back to you?
Absolutely. So it was a long process trying to figure out how to make videos that would be useful to prosecutors in, these topics. The topic of elder abuse is so complicated and consists of all these different forms of abuse and neglect. And so trying to distill information about it into videos that would be meaningful for people took some time. But what we ended up doing was bringing together prosecutors from across the country, including Paul, and people who had been prosecuting elder abuse for a long time, and asking them what they thought the most important topics would be for prosecutors who are just starting to handle elder abuse cases. And so we spent days with these prosecutors coming up with lists of topics that we thought someone first taking on these cases would need. And through those discussions, we eventually came up with a framework of topics for our video series. And that framework consists of 6 general subject areas that you can see are sort of outlined in the screenshot that Andy's showing you. And those topics, those general subject areas are investigations and charging, who the other agencies in the community are that we can turn to for information and for help, what information a prosecutor should have to properly handle these cases, how to find and work with experts, working with older victims, and then we have a 6th category just for other topics that don't really fit within the first 5. So once we created that framework, we then came up with sort of subtopics under each of those general subject areas, and then we developed a list of people who we felt had the expertise on those different areas. We then spent a lot of time videotaping these experts, and these were prosecutors who had been prosecuting these types of cases, doctors, capacity evaluators, forensic accountants, medical examiners, all sorts of experts who end up working on elder abuse cases in some way. And then after we had videotaped them, we spent many days listening to the interviews and then taking out clips of those interviews that fit best within the different subject areas of the framework that we composed. So it was a pretty lengthy process, and it still is also a work in progress. We have much more work to do, but I think we've got here the bones of what's going to be, I hope, a really helpful, meaningful tool for prosecutors to turn to.
Great. Thanks, Paige. With that, I thought it would be helpful if Paul and Paige take us through a tour of the different topics to give us a sense of what's in there. So, Paul, can I hand it over to you now to talk about investigations and charging?
Sure. Thanks, Andy, and hello again, everybody. It's terrific to join you all in this fascinating webinar. And I can't help but think back to 21 years ago this month when I was given the assignment to go out and prosecute elder abuse cases. And back then, there was very little access to internet. The mechanisms we had to find information were very limited, and I literally had to pick up the phone and call around the country. Is anyone prosecuting elder abuse? And like me, most people were saying, well, what is it? And I look now at what we have available to all of us, and it really is tremendous. And I hope that many of you will take full advantage of this website, bearing in mind what Andy told us, which is that this is a work in progress. And there are ways in which we can tweak it, change titles, add material. With your participation, this is going to be a very vibrant, active resource, which I hope you will be able to pass on to others. And I think one of the elements is that when you watch the video and download some of the material, we're not trying to say this is how you should do it, because many cases demand different approaches, different personalities of different prosecutors. I also feel that the material that we have available for you is not just limited to prosecutors. I hope you will invite victim advocates, district attorney investigators, support staff to sit in, and maybe over a lunchtime you can watch a couple of these segments and then have your own discussion internally. Well, what do we gain from this? How can we replicate something that was suggested? And that way, I'm really excited to think that we will gain traction nationally across the country. So, for example, you can see here with this website, we've broken it down into different units and subunits. So Section 1 is called Investigation and Charging. That may be a slightly misleading title, and we may tweak it eventually, because what we wanted to do was talk about the fundamentals of prosecutors and district attorneys' offices working hand in hand with local law enforcement. One thing I learned very quickly 21 years ago was that if I was going to sit in my office as a prosecutor with my hands folded and wait for the phone to ring and for detectives to come in with an elder abuse case ready to prosecute, I was sorely mistaken. And I learned that the best way forward for me as a prosecutor was to become much more proactive. get out there into the community with my local law enforcement, talk to them about what they're hearing, what they're seeing, and try to assist police officers in avoiding making possibly some errors which might therefore prevent a valid investigation from being prosecuted. For example, and I still have this response today, and you'd be surprised, but there are police officers who will close an investigation because, quote, the victim declines prosecution. And that is so adverse to everything we've been taught about in domestic violence. But for some reason, some police officers can fall into the trap of thinking, well, the victim doesn't want us to prosecute, therefore we're going to not follow the investigation. So that's just one example of prosecutors and law enforcement working together, understanding one another, appreciating each other's efforts. And then what I find really interesting is getting an overview of adult protective services in the second subpart of that, of Section 1. Someone like Ricka Hamilton talking about the role of APS. You know, when I first started in this 21 years ago, I'd never heard of adult protective services. I'd heard of child protective services, but APS, I didn't know what they did. But one thing I learned very quickly, too, was they welcomed me with open arms. And I think for prosecutors to reach out to their local APS caseworkers, meet with them over a brown bag lunch, and listen to some of their stories. And it's good when you go to these meetings is to have an understanding of their role. And in some states, their role is very much almost the form of a criminal investigator. In other states, it's more of a social worker role. So you need to know in your own county, in your own state, what your APS caseworker does. And then thirdly, in that section, how we as prosecutors and law enforcement can work together with APS. And you're going to hear ideas of coalitions and of how we as prosecutors can benefit from the insights of APS. And any time you get this triangular creation of services, social services from APS, law enforcement providing the first response, and then district attorneys, prosecutors providing the backup with issuing, hopefully, the case and bringing it to the courtroom. That model, as Ricka Hamilton says, can be a well-oiled machine. And for those states and counties where this is not in existence right now as being a well-oiled machine, by watching this video, I think you can gain a lot of encouragement and a lot of know-how on how to start that kind of relationship. Then, I don't know, Paige, if you have any feedback before I move on to number 2 on that one.
No, I just would emphasize what you said, Paul, about the importance of adult protective services and how in a lot of communities, law enforcement and adult protective services are not used to working together. And so reaching out to them and saying, look, we know you have information that can help us with our cases, and I think we can help you with your cases, and really offering that collaboration can have tremendous benefits. So I just think that's a great point.
Yes, and I think it does, the morale to APS is huge when prosecutors show an interest and a respect and a recognition of who they are, and then introducing APS to local law enforcement, because so often, as we all know, there can be a disconnect with social services and local law enforcement, and it's great that they understand each other. So
exactly, and I think, and Paul, can I just jump in one more thing?
Sure.
I think in a lot of communities, APS has become really disheartened with law enforcement's response to their cases, and so may have become somewhat cynical about the criminal justice system. And I think when they see prosecutors actually taking an interest in the cases, a lot of communities start seeing APS doing better investigations and really end results being much better for victims.
And that leads perfectly into Section 2 now of these different videos, which is entitled Who in the Community is Involved and How Can They Help? And the first video segment is entitled Collaboration is Crucial. And that's exactly what Paige and I have learned over these years, and what we want to share with you, and hopefully you can replicate, which is reaching out not just to this APS law enforcement component, but when you've established, because I do think that is primary, but once you've established a good working relationship, then together you reach out. And as I look back on my 21 years, I think The people who I then was able to reach out to were financial institutions. And in some of your states, of course, in fact, the majority maybe, they are at least reporters, maybe mandated reporters, maybe they certainly have protection from lawsuits or for sharing the information. They have some kind of immunity. So bank, credit unions are a key to bring them in. Obviously, medical centers, hospitals, doctors' offices, ER, urgent care facilities, talking to the triage nurses, and seeing what they see on a weekly basis. So we can't overemphasize the need for collaboration. One point that was made is you have a lunchtime meeting and you produce food, that's going to get them there. You know, just a simple thing like that, but you hear it from somebody who's tried it and done it and it works, you think, okay. And then you've got to figure out a way of how do you fund that lunch, and there are ways in which it can be done. And then a subunit there is victim advocates, helping victims to navigate the justice system. You know, I'm sure many of you prosecutors there listening into this webinar already appreciate and understand the vital role that victim advocates play in this system, and how we need to not only use the victim advocates in our office, but reach out to other victim advocacy organizations in your county. You know, some of you will be prosecuting not just victims who are older adults, 65 and older maybe, but you will be also prosecuting victims who are dependent adults, otherwise called vulnerable adults, maybe in their 20s or 30s, maybe somebody with autism. You know, we need to reach out to the advocates for those folks and understand what is necessary before we talk to the victim. Is anything particular that we need to know about their condition, either cognitively or physically? And this is all good information that will prepare prosecutors to hopefully not make as many mistakes that I certainly have made as I've been learning my way around this system. And then finally on that subunit, aging services networks. You know, I was totally amazed by the number of different organizations. I still haven't got a grip on how many there are, but when you look in your county and you see, okay, well, who takes care of guardianships? Who takes care of the mentally ill elders? What about Meals on Wheels? What part does AARP play? And how do we get all these different organizations, faith ministry organizations focusing on the elders, Salvation Army? There are so many aging services out there, and we need to be able to draw upon them. Maybe it is up to the district attorney's office to host a quarterly community luncheon. We just held one last Thursday in East County. Over 90 people attended from all walks of life, from all different agencies, and it enables us to spend an hour and a half together sharing, networking, and sometimes focusing on a particular subject. So this, I think, will help a great deal. And Paige, I'm just going to hand over to you now to take us into number 3.
Okay. And Paul, I just want to add to what you're saying, too, which is just that these cases are so uniquely multidisciplinary. I think more than any other area of prosecution, we're dealing with victims who often have a wide array of issues, so that we really need to get to know these agencies that Paul mentioned. A lot of victims have medical issues and mental health issues and legal issues and social issues or housing issues. So developing relationships with these agencies that Paul mentioned not only helps our victims to sort of get back into the community or get the help they need after they've been victimized, but it also helps us, because what we've found is that when we can get victims the services they need, they're often much more willing to cooperate in our prosecutions. So moving on to the third section, this is really where we bring in some of the expertise that we've been working to acquire in this field for as long as I've been in it. When I started in 2001, the only person I knew who knew anything about elder abuse was Paul Greenwood, and he taught me what I knew to get started, but what both of us were dealing with at that point was an incredible lack of expertise to help us with these cases. And since then, a small group of experts have become increasingly involved and have really turned out to be wonderful resources for us as we go forward with these complicated cases. And obviously, none of our communities have all of these experts, so that's one real beauty, I think, of this website is we've got these experts, really the leaders in the field on different aspects of elder abuse, being interviewed and offering us their knowledge and their insight on these cases. And I think that's such a gift of this website, and I'm so excited about that. But in this section, we've got 3 different experts talking about the medical aspects of elder abuse. Dr. Ronnie LaFazzo, who's at Weill Cornell Medical Center, who's a former nurse, talks about neglect and pressure sores. And for any of you who have handled a neglect case, I'm sure you know how complicated these cases are and how desperately we need good, solid medical help to understand them and to go forward with them. And then following her is a section on physical abuse and bruising. And Dr. Tony Rosen, also from Cornell, is interviewed in this section, and he is one of the few emergency medical and geriatric doctors in the country. So he works in an ER, and he also is a geriatrician, and he's got wonderful information on falls of the elderly and bruising in the elderly and what we can learn from the photographs we have and what kind of information we need in order to know whether we should be prosecuting a case and to help us prosecute those cases. We also have a section on the role of medical records in an elder abuse case, featuring a number of different experts, including the 2 I've just mentioned, and Dr. Laura Mosqueda, who really was the first medical expert I knew of who was out there helping us with these cases and just has a tremendous amount of knowledge and wisdom about doctors' roles in these cases and how they should be handled by us as prosecutors. So we've got all of these experts being interviewed, as well as some prosecutors giving their insight into medical records and how they, what information they can give us and what we can learn from them as far as making decisions in filing and in prosecuting cases. And then finally, a section with Dr. Rosen and LaFazzo on medical evidence, lab tests, and radiologic findings, and what that can tell us about whether abuse or neglect has occurred. And then moving on in this section, we have then another sort of subset of clips on cognitive capacity. And as many of you know, I'm sure capacity is a crucial factor in virtually every form of elder abuse. Consent is the defense that we see most often in cases of neglect, in cases of financial exploitation, and in cases of sexual abuse. And whether a victim can consent depends on whether they have capacity. So in so many of our cases, no matter what form of abuse we're talking about, we are ending up getting the victim assessed or at least getting medical records to help us figure out whether the victim had capacity. This is just an incredibly important section, I think. And so for this section, we have Dr. Harry Morgan is sort of our featured expert, and he is a geriatric psychiatrist who's a wonderful teacher and really, I think, does a beautiful job of clearly explaining capacity and the role it plays in elder abuse cases. We then have another clip on capacity and its relationship to consent, and then another one on cognitive capacity evaluations and screening tools. Dr. Morgan and Dr. LaFazzo give us more information on what different tools tell us and which ones are the best assessors of whether someone has capacity, and then what the significance is of getting of full-blown capacity evaluations and when we need to get those for our victims. Anything to add there, Paul?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, capacity, it does strike at the heart of a lot of cases, and it actually strikes into the way you approach a case. For example, and I mentioned this in the video, if you have a detective who, without taking time to find out about the capacity issues of the victim, takes a medical release form to the victim's bedside, says, here, sign this, I want to get your medical records, and you end up with a signature of a victim on a very sophisticated legal document, but then thereafter, the prosecutor's approach is going to be of lack of capacity because, therefore, no consent to whatever it was you're alleging. It creates an embarrassing tension between detective, prosecutor and jury as to, well, why did you get the victim to sign this if, in fact, the prosecutor is saying there's lacking capacity? So this really strikes at the heart of so many elder abuse cases.
It's so true. And so figuring out whether a victim has capacity is important to our investigation of our case as well as the prosecution of the case. We have then another section in this same larger segment on consent and other common defenses that we see on different forms of elder abuse cases. And then a section on overcoming defenses. And again, this is very general information. Obviously, we can't be that specific here just because there's too much to cover, but I think it gives us a good idea of what kinds of defenses we see besides consent and some general thoughts on what we need in order to overcome some of those defenses. And then we have a section on undue influence, which we also see very often, especially in financial exploitation cases. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, we use a theory of undue influence where we see perpetrators who have essentially taken over the lives of a vulnerable victim by controlling their decisions, often isolating them, manipulating them, deceiving them, threatening them. So essentially, they've taken over the free will of the victim in order to obtain their consent, and I put that in quotes, to turn over their assets to the perpetrator. And these are cases that are really complicated to both investigate and to prosecute. And I think there's very little information out there for a lot of patrol officers on this type of exploitation. And so that means that we end up missing a lot of these cases. So this in particular is a section I think that's very useful not only to prosecutors but also to law enforcement. And then we finally have our next larger section is on how to work with and find experts. And we have 3 general types of experts that we found are the most common in elder abuse cases and the most necessary. And those are medical experts, forensic accountants, and cognitive capacity evaluators. So we have some video clips on each one of those forms of experts, and then information on who these people are in the community, how we can find them, and how we can use them, and how they can help us in our cases. And then the final clip in that segment is on working with expert witnesses. This is sort of on the care and feeding of experts, what they need from us as far as getting them to cooperate in our cases and help us in our cases, and how they can help us. And Paul, I don't know if this is true for you, but I've ended up using experts as much to help me figure out whether we should file charges in a case as I use them in the actual prosecution of the case.
Particularly when it's a physical neglect case, which is not as easy to interpret whether this is a simple carelessness or does it go into willful behavior where the person should have known and ignored all the warning signs. And, you know,
Exactly.
One of the great resources page that I'm finding in this is not only do we identify certain experts, but then that will lead us to look at articles that each of these experts have written. I mean, they're all over the web. And this helps before you reach out to any particular expert to educate ourselves. You know, I remember the first case I ever did with decubitus ulcers page. You know, I just was unaware of stages 1, 2, 3, and 4, and how long it takes, and some of the defenses that people throw up. But when you read these articles and see the diagrams, it really, really helps.
That's right, Paul. And a lot of these articles are actually on the website, the DOJ website, too. So it's so wonderful to have that resource so easily accessible for us.
Well,
and it also saves us time and money as far as when we're paying these experts to help us. If we can be educated, obviously we're much more efficient in our meetings with them, and we can get a lot further with them without having to pay as much money as if they need to educate us on the basics of that subject area.
Exactly. So if I may, let me just move into Section 5, which we call Working with Older Victims, and then I'll head over to you for some of these, Paige. But working with older victims has been a fascinating experience for me for the last 21 years. I think that one of the major reasons why I wanted to stay in this field for so long is the absolute joy and privilege it is to spend time in the company of so many of these older adults who have fascinating histories. And what I also found was that there is a common misconception amongst law enforcement and maybe some prosecutors out there that when you get an 85-year-old person who's a witness on the stand, it's not going to go well for you. Well, nothing could be further from the truth in most of my cases. It is such a pleasant and delightful and sometimes humorous experience to put an elderly person on the witness stand. But yet there are some issues that victims have, which we have to address and try to overcome. And one of the biggest ones, particularly when you're issuing a case against a grandson, which is what I did last week, and you have an 80-year-old grandmother who is the victim of physical and financial abuse, there is going to be, in many cases, an inbuilt reluctance by that victim to cooperate with the prosecution and with the investigation. Learning how to address the reluctance is very, very important. And I think if you've had any domestic violence training, a lot of what you're going to hear on this video will parallel with that and will support it and strengthen your resolve to work with a reluctant victim. The worst thing we can do is to simply say to law enforcement, yeah, you're right, a victim doesn't want us to prosecute, okay, let's close it. No, that's a disservice to the victim, and as we know, it means it's a green light to the perpetrator to do it again. What about when the victim has dementia, Paige? What are some of the things there that we can highlight?
Well, I think that's another area where we have so many misconceptions about the impact of that condition on our cases. A lot of people have dementia and they're completely capable of testifying. So whether or not someone has dementia does not necessarily determine how we handle a case. It does usually mean that we are dealing with a limited timeline as far as how long the case can be played out. We usually want to speed up those prosecutions because we are talking about someone who is generally going to be having declining memory as time passes. But I've had a lot of cases I've brought where a victim has had a dementia diagnosis and been incredibly articulate and capable of talking about what's happened to them as far as the victimization is concerned. But it also means we need to be looking for other evidence and other witnesses and really trying to make sure that our case does not rest on the victim's testimony alone. And this section talks about that and talks about different strategies in working with victims with dementia on our cases.
That's great. And I think in the interest of time, I'll keep this next part short. But I think both Paige and I, in terms of interviewing strategies, we both came to the same conclusion from our experience. Interviewing the victim, if possible, at home is best. And for so many reasons that the video goes into. So that's another key area which I think we can learn a lot from. But I do want Paige to talk about this last section about facility dog. Paige has done an extraordinary program in King County. Why don't you tell us about it, Paige?
Sure, Paul. We have a program called Courthouse Dogs that is now, I think, pretty common across the country. And these are dogs called facility dogs who are employees essentially of the prosecutor's office and who sit with victims and help them through the interview process and through testimony and potentially sentencing, and really just act as a comfort to them if they are particularly anxious or fearful of going through a trial. We use them with children as well as with vulnerable adults, and we've just had tremendous success in this program. So if anyone's interested in that, feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to fill you in and give you more information and contacts for it. And then the last section, Paul, I'll just end our description of the videos. The last section is going to be our sort of more miscellaneous section, and we have only one clip in there right now. We will have more later, but this one is on autopsies, specifically in cases of potential neglect. And this is an interview that I did with a medical examiner in King County who has a lot of knowledge about neglect. And she basically talks about the importance of the medical examiner and how they can be an ally to us in determining whether a case that we're looking at is criminal or not, and also in assisting with prosecution.
Great. So there's so many resources out there, and Andy, it's back to you now to tell us more about what else we can benefit from on this great website.
Great. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Paige. With our remaining time, I wanted to highlight some of the additional resources that are available in the prosecution section as well as elsewhere in the website. So if I'm going back to the main landing page for the prosecutor, section. The first one I would highlight is the Federal and State Samples Directory. As a prosecutor myself, having templates or go-bys is really important, especially if I'm thrown into a subject matter that I'm not comfortable with or aware of. And so what we did was design this as a repository for mostly publicly available documents and pleadings that are common in elder abuse cases. And so this allows people, to the extent that they're in a state where we've had the good fortune of having prosecutors be able to contribute, to be able to go into the website and search for some of these materials, including opinions or indictments or criminal information or jury instructions. And again, this is very much a work in progress, and this is very much an area where we rely upon state and local prosecutors to help contribute to this. This database, this repository, is only as good and as current as the people who are contributing to it. And so while we hope that this is a useful resource to all of you, to the extent that you have done an elder abuse prosecution or you have materials that you think would be valuable to others in your state or nationwide, we strongly urge you to take a look at this and consider contributing to this section. In addition to the samples directory, there's also a section with state elder abuse laws. And again, this covers a wide array of laws, including those involving elder abuse, guardianship, power of attorney. If you go into, for example, the civil elder abuse law section, you just type it in, this one will take you to the NCEA, which has a phenomenal repository of that. And for each one of these, it may either take you to a different website or it may take you to somewhere within the Elder Justice website that has gathered information on those different types of laws. For example, with regard to financial exploitation, this is a state-by-state searchable database. So for example, if you wanted to look at the Elder Justice financial exploitation statutes in California, and you want to look at the different categories, civil or criminal, you could do so, and the search results will come up. Two other quick areas within the prosecutor section. One highlights the department's elder justice task forces, which were launched earlier last year. These are federal, state, and local task forces designed to improve the coordination in efforts, primarily to look at nursing homes that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing and providing grossly substandard care, but also to collaborate on a wide array of other issues depending upon what is happening geographically in those jurisdictions. This is very much a pilot program building off of successful multidisciplinary teams elsewhere, but the question is, if the federal government, the state government, and local prosecutors are all communicating on a more regular basis, is there a way that we can improve our collective efforts? So there's not so much jurisdiction bumping into one another, or whether or not we can actually do more with leads as they come up more effectively. So anyway, this just highlights those 10 elder justice task forces around the country and some of their efforts. The last thing I would highlight in the prosecutor section is the MDT Technical Assistance Center. This is a resource that is available to everyone who is interested in developing a multidisciplinary team. We have Talitha Gwen Shaver, who is our advisor. Her contact information is there. And this, again, is a free resource to anyone who either has an MDT and has questions about how to improve it, or if you are looking to start one. This is designed to encourage those, as there have been indications that those are effective ways to increase collaboration at the state and local level, in addition to doing better for elder abuse victims and their families. And so again, I know that both Paige and Paul participate in their respective MDTs and have found them to be effective. And again, this is a resource to not just prosecutors, but also to law enforcement or anyone at the state and local level who is interested in starting their own MDT. Beyond that, I want to highlight, with the remaining time, just a couple of other resources that are available not just to prosecutors but to everyone. First, I would go over to the victims, families, and caregivers section. First of all, this provides background for victims and their families if they want to learn more about different forms of physical or psychological or different forms of elder abuse. But then there's another resource, which is to report abuse or find help. And so here, again, it provides, obviously, if it's an immediate emergency, we recommend that people call 911. But there, for non-life-threatening emergencies, there are other resources available, 1-800 lines. To the extent that you want to get in contact with your local APS, there's an ability to do that. But then there's also, on the far right, this map. So again, to the extent that you have someone who is more visually inclined, like myself, to the extent that you want to find what resources are available to you, you can go on this website. And for example, if you want to see what's available in Kansas, let's say, you can click on this. And for each state, we have tried to gather information about all these different types of resources and personnel and people within the aging community, including federal, state, and local law enforcement, the long-term care ombudsman, victim services, area aging, agencies on aging, legal aid. And so you can type the victim or their family member, or anyone can type in a zip code, and it will identify those resources that are available within a certain geographic area. This is also very much a work in progress. Our goal is to bring in as much information as we can. To the extent that within a community there is not a resource, that is obviously a problem. To the extent that a victim or a family doesn't even know about those resources, that seems to be a barrier that we can overcome. And so this section is an attempt by us to try to make all that information as readily available to victims, families, to law enforcement, prosecutors, as much as possible. We anticipate trying to expand this to add elder abuse shelters, faith-based organizations, and basically anyone who we think that could benefit or help serve as a resource or to provide support for victims of elder abuse. So that is something that we want to highlight. Another resource that we want to highlight is in the financial exploitation section. Obviously, this is an area that has received a tremendous amount of attention, and we're seeing it more and more every day. In addition to highlighting some of the scams, at least that the Department of Justice has identified or noticed, there is also the Elder Abuse Resource Roadmap, which I want to highlight very, very quickly. This is a interactive tool which we hope, and again, I'll just highlight, these are the different topic areas that it covers. These are primarily focusing on what resources are available at the federal level. It doesn't cover state and local, but what resources and information are available at the federal level, so that to the extent that someone wants to report something or provide information on these types of crimes at the federal level, this would provide the ability to do so. And what it does here is that we've created what we hope is a user-friendly navigational tool for someone who could just go through. Let's say they were harmed by a financial professional. Through a series of questions, let's say the next question is, does it involve credit cards or structured bonds or commodity futures? Let's say it involves credit cards. Through a series of pretty straightforward questions, we hope that it will direct them to the relevant federal agency, where they can either get information or they can submit a complaint to the relevant agency. And again, this is in response to concerns that were raised about the fact that it's really hard to figure out what available resources there are at the federal level, that we need to increase the transparency. This is our attempt to do that, at least at the federal level. We've begun exploring the possibility of developing similar types of navigational tools at the state and local level. But again, that is what we have to date. Two other quick things to highlight, maybe a few other. One is regarding law enforcement, and again, I think Paul mentioned the fact that this website has resources for not just prosecutors, but for law enforcement as well. Obviously, they are a critical partner in our efforts. And so to the extent you're a prosecutor and you're working with law enforcement, we recommend that you take a look at this resource and make sure that they're available, make sure that they're knowledgeable about the fact that these resources are available to them as well. Likewise, for victim specialists or victim advocates, to the extent that they have information here for them as well regarding victim rights, webinars that the Department of Justice has helped to support, training and information for victim specialists, and a wide array of other resources. And the last thing I would highlight pertains to research and related literature. Again, as a prosecutor myself, oftentimes we're dealing with a domain where there is significant expert dispute. While this research repository is in part to service researchers of elder abuse to provide them with an easy way to identify the most current literature available regarding a wide array of issues involving elder abuse, this is also a resource for prosecutors as well, to the extent that you want to know what is the most up-to-date or relevant clinical evidence and literature involving different types of issues, including capacity or forensic markers or different types of physical abuse of elders. This is a repository of information for you as well. Again, there's a lot more, and I would urge you to take the time to go through it and get familiar with the various resources, but this is very much, again, a resource for you, for state and local prosecutors and for law enforcement and for victims and their families, and to the extent that there are ways that we can make this a more robust, useful resource, we are certainly open to that. So with that, I think we're going to transition back to the slide section. So if Danielle, you can help me get back there. Thank you. So again, with the few minutes that we have remaining, we wanted to see if there were questions that anybody wanted to ask. Paul or Paige, let's see what we have.
Yeah, there's a question from Ralph O'Neill there, Andy.
Huh?
There's a question from Ralph O'Neill.
Yep, I saw that.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. We are in the process now of, we've done outreach to NDAA, the National Associations of Attorneys General, as well as NAMFUCU, in terms of coordinating with them on how to do more training. We are going to be working with NAAG, the NAG, later this year at their annual conference out in Oregon. I think we are also collaborating with various, with NAMFUCU on training. We've done that in the past in terms of providing training for MUFUCU attorneys on elder justice cases, and we would be happy to work with NDAA as well. Likewise, to the extent that people are aware of other repositories of information that we should be linking to, we urge you to let us know. Obviously, this is something that we want to be used, and so to the extent that there is some other large font of elder abuse prosecution materials, let us know. We do not want to be redundant. We do not want to recreate the wheel, and we really do want to make this stuff as available as possible. So to the extent that you're aware of any, we urge you to let us know. Are there any other questions that people have? Feel free to type it in. I see, well, I guess I don't see any other questions. Okay, one more. How should reporting be done if you're a worker in a facility? I suppose to Ms. Garrett, that depends on the type of issue that you're looking to report. Obviously, to the extent that it is fraud, there is an OIG hotline. To the extent that it is a particular type of abuse or type of mistreatment, long-term care ombudsman may be where you go to report. So if
I could
want
jump in, sorry, can I just jump in there, Andy? And because this is the great thing about the website, because depending on where you are, Doretha, you know, the question is a mandated reporter. Presumably, if most states would say a worker in a facility is mandated by law to report. So then the question is, who do you report to? And as Andy mentioned, it could be the ombudsman, it could be Adult Protective Services, and it could be and/or local law enforcement. And one of the big concerns we have is that often employees are discouraged by facility administration from being a mandated reporter. So this is very important that we get this kind of message and material even to workers within these facilities.
There's also protection for workers who do report in most states, so that if you report in good faith and there is some kind of retaliation against you, you have legal protection.
Great. Thank you, Paul and Paige, for that. With that, I think we have come to the end of our webinar. To the extent that you have any additional questions or comments, feel free to email us at elder.justice@usdoj.gov, and we will try to respond. And to the extent that you have other comments or suggestions or want to send us stuff, you can email that as well. So with that, I'd like to thank Paige and Paul for their time and their wisdom today, as well as TTAC for helping us plan and prepare for this webinar. And we wish you all the best and good luck in your endeavors in this important field. So thank you all very much, and bye-bye.